So why did you start a religion?
Mm. Well, originally, I didn't intend to. Um, I I grew up in as a traditionalist Catholic, so my grandparents were part of the Society of St. Pius X. I don't know if you've heard of that before. Which basically they disagreed with when the church changed the mass over to English, and you could sort of say the mass in whatever language you want. And they disagreed with that, and they had very conservative stance on everything, including religious freedom. So when I was growing up, we weren't able to ask questions. It was sort of just read your catechism, read this. That there was no sort of challenge, there was no critique. So when I got a bit older and I got to university and started to meet other people, because I feel like I grew up in a bit of an echo chamber, if you will. Um, and then I just started to learn more about religion. I started to looking up at the stars. I started to get this sort of sense of connection to the stars from when I was maybe between 15 and 17 that started. And then when I went to uni, it really started to develop a lot more. And it was just sort of a liberation for me, really, from sort of that childhood that I had where we weren't allowed to ask questions, and I asked questions about everything later on. So I didn't initially intend to start a religion. It was more a liberation for me. And as I read more, experienced more, and then I wanted to sort of share this, really, these experiences that I had. And then I started to call it Astronism. From 2018, I started to call it Astronism. Um, and I don't know, I just sort of developed from there, really. I've always been a creative person, so it made sense to me to start writing books and doing websites and doing things like this, like podcasts, etc. And yeah, just sort of sharing this avenue of religion, spirituality that I came across, which was directed towards the stars and sort of, what should we say, like the far future as well. I'm very interested in the far future of humanity and where we're heading as a species. So yeah, that's where it sort of started off. I would say a liberation, but I didn't sort of initially at the start set out to say like I'm going to start religion, and you know what I mean. It sort of just developed over time, and the experience that I was having developed into astronism. And also, I should say as well, I was hesitant as well to share my experiences. Like I said, I didn't set out to make this a public thing, but I felt that what I'd experienced maybe could inspire other people. I wasn't really seeing what I was experiencing and the beliefs I had out there anyway. Do you know what I mean? There was no one else sort of. Over time, I've met other people who do share similar beliefs to me, but I wasn't seeing that at the time, and so I thought, well, I'll put it out there then if no one else is, and so that's where astronism came from. Yeah.
That's really cool, man. I like that it sort of had came from an individual creative beginning, in that questions that
Yeah.
you found were shut down as a kid, you could then try and answer, and through searching for those answers and whatever came to you, you then expressed that through your own means in your own way, and that sort of it developed in its own organic manner, I guess. My question
Yes.
is there any way you could summarize some of the principles of
Oh.
activism? What are some of the key takeaways that you would give somebody who's interested in it, and what are the kind of questions that it tries to answer, or at least asks?
Yeah, so I've been asked this a lot, of course. It's probably one of the main questions. And I've got, hopefully, we'll see now, but over time, I feel like got better at trying to to summarize it. At the start, it was quite difficult because when something's still forming in your own mind and you don't have a full idea of it, it can be difficult to express that to others. Um, Also, as well, it took a long time to pinpoint what actually is an astronist and what distinguishes an astronist from other religious groups. And the one thing that does, to answer your question, is transcension. So the main dogma of Astronism, because we distinguish between dogma and doctrine. So in Astronism, there's only one dogma, which is transcension, which can't change. So that is fundamental. So if you don't believe in transcension, you can't be an Astronist. Doctrine, we have many of those, and they can change over time, and they do change over time with debate, with me discussing the beliefs with other people, just sort of naturally developing over time. But transcension is the fundamental. So transcension is the idea that humanity's salvation will come about through our expansion into outer space. And the essential idea is that as we expand more, we develop more, we gain scientific and technological advancements more, we will become closer to God. So we are theists, really. There are a few people I've spoken to who are interested in Astronism, but they are atheists, and there's been some interesting discussions about whether they could be Astronist or atheist Astronists. But on the whole, the official theology is panentheistic. But the fundamental dogma is transcension. So it's this idea that salvation comes from our expansion to the stars and ultimately reuniting with God, we believe. So we believe that...
Can I just jump in a second?
Yes.
No, I want you to carry on, of course, but I just want to clarify things for me and Jacob and probably the people listening who probably have similar questions. So does this mean, like, purely in like the physical sense that we will develop into an interplanetary species and that we will end up starting living on Mars and then go on from there and there and there, and that's what you mean? It's purely in a like physical expanding the landscape we can live on, rather than like a spiritual way of expanding into the cosmos type vibe. Do you know what I'm asking?
Yes, yeah. I think that there's two sides to it. I would definitely say there's a spiritual side to it, because again, like I said, we are panentheists, so we do believe in the sort of existence of a metaphysical aspect of reality, of existence. But the majority of what I'm talking about when I say transcension, I do mean the sort of like the physical side. So physically going out there, expanding, and then actually, yes, physically, well, it's very far-fetched, but the ultimate goal is to escape the cosmos. That is the ultimate goal, is to escape the universe, because that's what we believe where God is, which is however we could do that. It's about sort of reuniting with God beyond the cosmos, because until then, we're always going to be limited. We're always going to have the sort of both physical and spiritual limitations, that we can't fully connect to God right now. That's what we believe, that we can't fully connect to God. We have to go out, and in a way, outer space for us is kind of the stepping stone, if you will, to God. It's the stepping stone, and like you said, it is it's very much a physical salvation. Yeah,
I think
with a spiritual aspect to it. Yeah,
I think I heard or read where you was talking about this being like a battle between limitation and transcension. Could you sort of go into that like a little bit, and how humans we're limited, and maybe we're craving this transcension, and maybe the different ways?
Yeah, it's definitely a struggle. I used to call it maybe cosmic struggle, perhaps, or something like that, or scope struggle, I used to call it. Yeah, it's a struggle. It's a battle between these two aspects, which is limitation and then, like you said, transcension. And ultimately, what this is about is us realizing that everything around us, everything we do, is limited. Even the Earth, the sun, the moon, etc., even galaxies, they're all limited. We live in a limited reality. There's nothing that's infinite to what we know at this moment in time. I'm not saying that there might be opportunities for sort of an infinite aspect to something. So, like, I don't know, quantum mechanics and things like this may lead us into infinite I don't know, realms maybe. But the one that we exist in right now, and the one that we know, and the one that we live in is limited. And to me, that is the sort of grand narrative, if you will. It's the grand narrative of the cosmos, is this battle. It's this battle between us having the concepts of infinity, of God, of divinity, of, immortality even as well. We have these concepts, but we can't get to them. We can't create them. We can't reach them yet. So it's this transcension really is my sort of suggestion as to how we might reduce our limitation and increase our freedom, our capabilities, to get closer to God, really. So it is definitely a battle. It's definitely a battle that we are dealing with every day. There's a important aspect of Astronism is the idea of suffering. We are suffering all the time as humans in the physical realm. From disease, from disasters, all these kinds of things. And they, to me, are necessary. Actually, they are necessary in the cosmos. We couldn't exist. The cosmos wouldn't exist as it does without those limitations, and a result of those is suffering. So transcension is also about relieving us of our suffering, really, relieving us of those limitations. And the less limited we become in our minds, in our bodies, in our spirit even, the closer we get to what could be conceived of as God.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think you point to some interesting ideas. I agree with you in the sort of how finitude and limitation is baked into being a human being, and then that's something we have to come to terms with, because I think I've said many similar things along this line in podcast episodes before. But the thing about being a human is that we're aware of that. We're aware of our limitation, which is one of the things that makes us drastically different from the animal kingdom and the rest of the natural world. My question would be, what are the kind of physical practices or rituals or, I don't know, regular behavior, thought, belief patterns that really define someone as a follower of your religion? Like what? Because to me, that is what separates a religion from like just a system of ideas or a system of beliefs. Is the like physical ritual or practices or ways that people come together, or community behaviors and that kind of thing. Are there anything like that with what you've created? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I will answer that. I'll just add to what you were saying about these other species. I call that scope. So I call this our awareness of our limitations, of our possibility to become sort of infinite beings or reunite with God. I call that scope. So there's sort of those two types of species. There's those species that don't have it, and there's those that do. Also, as well, in Astronism, we believe that there are other life forms in the universe that also have scope. So it's not just us. We're not just the only species to have this ability. But I just wanted to add to that because it is part of Astronism. In terms of practical rituals and things like this, some of them are still in development. I'm still trying to get to the end of this book that I've been talking about for years, called the Astrodoxy, which is going to add so much more to Astronism, and this is a book that includes even more detail on things like you've been asking. But in terms of everyday practice, I would say things just like, well, for example, I practice like cosmic meditation. So I will literally go out in my garden at night, when no one else is around, and I will sit there and I will do sort of a normal meditation practice like a Buddhist would do, but it's under the stars, and I may look up at the stars, and also stargazing obviously is a practice. I know that can be it is mainly a secular practice, but for me that has a sort of spiritual significance. So people can go to things like star parties. I don't know if you've heard of those. And you don't necessarily have to go with other astronists. You can go with people who are just interested in space, but within you, there is a spiritual aspect to what you're doing. There is you don't have to shout it out to other people, but there is that sort of spiritual, existential sort of connection that you have, that or nourishment, shall we say, that you get from those practices. Originally, I had sort of been very against having very set rituals in Astronism, because I don't know, because of my background as a Catholic and the Mass being so central to everything that we did in life, I originally was very suspicious and not wanting that kind of ritual in what I was creating, because it could become very rigid, and I think it has to have. I mean, obviously the Mass does have meaning, but if I was to create some kind of ritual, it would have to have that kind of fundamental meaning. And sort of, I in the new book that I'm developing, there is a sort of Astronist Mass, if you will, that I think will hopefully inspire people to work towards transcension, both collectively and in their own lives. So it is geared towards doing that. It's not been published yet, but it does exist. But again, like I said, I'm wondering whether I want to do that. But at the moment, it's very much an individual practices, these sort of internal spiritual practices like meditation, just looking up at the stars, you know. I've had times when I felt very disconnected from my faith, and then when I've looked up at the stars and really spent time properly, not just glance up, but really spent time doing that, and really thinking deeply, it's reconnected me to my faith. In terms of community, Astronism was founded as a sort of digital religion, so we've always been kind of spread out really across the world. You know, I speak to people regularly from different parts of the world. That has its advantages and its disadvantages, because obviously there isn't that in-person connection. Hopefully that will come in time, as hopefully more people sort of join Astronism and they set up their own sort of communities where they live. You know, but yeah, I hope that will come in time, more of that sort of community in-person aspects to Astronism. But I think it takes a long time to develop that, and I think we're still at, even though it's been sort of 12 years since I started it, I think we're still at that beginning stages, really. We're very much still at the beginning stages. But hopefully, you know, hopefully there will be that in-person community. But still, there is the digital community, who I am in regular touch with, or try to be.
Can I ask, what limitations do you think we need to break down in ourselves? Because I know you spoke about the kind of maybe the big goal of escaping this planet and venturing into the universe, which sounds amazing, but is that like that maybe is going to be like maybe some future stage where we're more developed as a species and we sort of start with the individual? And so yeah, do you have any thoughts on what specific limitations are in ourselves?
I think that it's about, in a way, that's what caught my eye of your podcast, is being open-minded. I think so many of us are narrow-minded, to even what is out there in terms of outer space. People don't realize that there's not much education. I mean, it's getting better, but I think that there is still a lack of understanding of how small we really are in the universe and how limited we really are. But again, the awareness is increasing. So I would say about being open-minded, I think. I used to call it philosophical spirit. So I used to be really into philosophy. I used to be really, and I still am. I used to be very much this sort of person who was sort of open-minded and wanting to debate people and discuss things. I feel like our society's become so shallow, you know, all about sort of making money and material things, which are important. They are important, but I feel that, especially maybe the younger generation, we don't discuss things as much as we should, and maybe we're not as open-minded, and we do live in these echo chambers. So it's about opening yourself up to maybe people who do have different ideas to you, or who may challenge your concepts and your worldview. So I'd say that's one thing. In terms of what we could do ourselves internally as well, and also physically, I think is about being healthy. I think, yeah, this is something else that's come into to Astronism more recently, is looking after yourself. There's so many vices in society today. There's so many drug taking, alcohol, these kinds of things, which may not be bad in moderation, but people can, go over the top with those kinds of things. So I think it's about healthiness, being healthy. If we aren't healthy, we're not going to get up to space, are we? If we're not going to get there if we're not healthy mind, healthy body as well. So I think it's about things like that. So there's sort of that mental aspect, the physical aspect, and then also the spiritual aspect. That involves, I think, being open to God, I think. There's a lot of people today who are atheists. There's a lot of people who doubt God's existence. That's something that I've never struggled with. I've struggled with my own beliefs. I've struggled with the idea of transcension even. Like, could we really do this? When we look at the world and how we are today in wars and these kinds of things, and I've even thought to myself, could we even do this? So I've had doubts in even transcension. I've had doubts, but I've never had doubt in the existence of God. That's something I've never had. One thing that should say is that transcension is our way to get to God, but belief in transcension is separate to belief in God. You might believe in God, but you might think, well, are we actually going to get there? There's nothing guaranteed about transcension. That's something else to say, is that transcension's a sort of future oriented salvation. It's not guaranteed. So we're very different from Christians in that way, where they have their salvation guaranteed. Jesus came, he died on the cross, he brought about salvation. That's not us. We're the opposite of that. Our salvation's in the future. So in that way, it's very hard to be an Astronist sometimes, because we don't have that comfort sometimes of, well, our salvation's already established. Well, no, we don't have that, because we rely on what humans are going to do to get to God. And so that's why it can be hard sometimes as an Astronist, when we see what is happening in the world and the sort of rhetoric we see in the world. So yeah.
One thing that's just come to me as you were talking is
yes,
is around that point you've just made about there, and the difference in salvation compared to your line of belief and Christianity. And from, I guess, in Christian thought, it's like there's individual salvation in the afterlife. You be a good person, you follow the principles of the Bible, you act Christ-like throughout your life, and then you reach you reach the kingdom of God in the afterlife, and you can live sort of in eternal heaven. With your line of thinking, I'm going, well, I don't know whether in my lifetime the human species will become interplanetary, right? So I might die and we never reach that state of salvation. What's going to keep me faithful? What's going to keep me going? Do you have any ideas of the afterlife, or is it
yes,
that might be something I work towards and something I believe, but really it's only something for my later generations?
I do. I believe that we have a soul. I believe we have maybe like a soul or spirit. And I do believe that exists after we die. But I believe that contingent on us getting that our soul reaching God is transcension. So I do think that individual salvation is intertwined with the salvation as a whole of our species. I do think the two are intertwined. So I'm, again, very different from the Christian idea there, where it's more individual. I think it is more to do, I think it's intertwined with our species. So I do think there is a sort of, like I said, I do think there's a soul. I think it exists after we die. I think it goes up to space, because I do think there is a sort of metaphysical aspect to space. I do think that. I think that there's I call it the overworld. That's what I call it. So it's the sort of opposite of the underworld. I sort of thought of that word. I think it's called the overworld. I think that's where all souls congregate, really, after they die, after our physical bodies die. But I do think that those souls getting to God is dependent on the species as a whole reaching God in the physical realm. You've got to remember that the soul, once it leaves our body, there is no sort of time, if you know what I mean. There's no sort of, it's not, well, I suppose it may be bound by time to a degree, but we're not aware of time as much as we would be in the physical body. So, our souls may be waiting there for many thousands of years for our species to eventually reach God. But yeah, I do think there is an afterlife, though. I do think there is an element of that. But whether we reach God, on our own merits, again, is something that I doubt. It's something that I don't quite think that that's true. I think that it's intertwined with transcension. It's intertwined with what our descendants are doing. It's intertwined with that. And that's, in a way, that is not dissimilar to quite a few of the Eastern religions, especially in China. Some of the folk religions there believe in sort of ancestor worship and connecting with your ancestors, and they have sort of similar, not exactly the same, but similar ideas of there being this connection between ourselves and those who in our species who've come before us, and they are reliant on us to be good, to do good, to aim for salvation. So in that sense, Astronism does borrow a little bit from the Chinese religions in that way, because they do have this idea of connecting to your ancestors, and that is similar for Astronism. Obviously, ours is more sort of space themed, space orientated, but more than the Chinese religions. But yeah, there's definitely a connection there that I've identified.
I'm interested in how these ideas you think came to you, and where you think their source is from, and what that process and that experience was like, going back to like the really early days. I mean, you touched on it, I guess, in the first question of that you began opening your mind to different things, and space became very alluring to you, and you investigated that in yourself and then started expressing it. But like, where do you think these ideas come from? How did you stimulate them? What did that feel like? Did it feel like, I don't know, some sort of metaphysical force placed the thoughts in your head when you were in a state of meditation, or like how did you get from the very first stage of like questioning to, oh, I think this is the answer, I think this is what salvation is?
Yes, so over time, like I said, during that period where I was sort of mid-teens going into late teenage years, I had various spiritual experiences, what have been traditionally called ecstasies. So it's sort of I don't know if you've had these experiences before yourself, but they may be quite rare. I don't know how often people experience these things, but it's sort of like a trance-like state of so I'd be doing meditation, for example, and I'd just get to this place where I had this sort of vision. And I've tried to actually create some illustrations to show what this might have been like, to show what this, was like, to help other people understand it. But basically they're called ecstasies or astral ecstasies, and they'd be where I could see visions of the transcension. So visions of the future, visions of us on other planets, visions of us maybe even meeting God, reaching God, and during those I'd have this sort of tsunami of ideas, concepts, terminology, even words like transcension would come out, and I'd have to write it down really quickly, or else I would forget it. And I'd have this sort of waves of ideas, and I'd try to get as many of those written down as I could on paper. And a lot of those were included in the Omnidoxy, which is the first Astronist book that I wrote. And even the sort of the way the Omnidoxy is written, I don't know. I go back at it and read it, and I think, God, this is sort of crazy stuff. Even though I wrote it, it seems like it's come from somewhere else. It doesn't seem like
Might have to.
I don't know. It seems kind of alien in a way. I don't know. Even for me, it seems alien. So you can imagine for other people, it can seem very, very strange. The way it's written, the sort of the ideas that are there, and the layers to the ideas as well. So yeah, just to sort of experience those kind of things, and they were very exhausting, very exhausting experiences. I'd sort of be able to, I'd have to go to sleep straight away after I had those experiences, very draining experiences. I felt that there was this, like you said, like a force within me, almost like a force that was sort of pushing me to get these ideas down. Is really important. The importance of these ideas was being stressed to me. This sort of a physical and spiritual sort of push to say, no, you need to do this. You need to write these things down. Even though you are exhausted, even though you're tired, you need to write these things down, get them on paper. And that's what I did. So I don't know. I do think, to answer your question, the second part of your question, I do think that these ideas came from God. So I do refer to them as revelation. But the key thing there is, and this is the key thing, in Astronism, it's not just me who's had these ideas, who's had these revelations. So we do believe in, other religions call it continuing revelation. I think in Astronism we call it sort of universal revelation, maybe something like that, where anyone could have these kinds of experiences. So it's not a sort of top-down sort of religion in that way, where I'm at the top sort of dictating to everyone, this is the new revelation I've had and you must believe that. It was like that at the start, because obviously I started it off, but now it's become much more like, I want other people to tell me about their experiences. Have they had similar revelations to what I've had? So it's very much a sort of open playing field now, in a way, where anyone could have these kind of revelations. Does that mean their revelations are going to be part of Astronist doctrine? No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that. I mean, I've had so many people, as you can imagine, email me over the years saying, I've experienced this, and it's God telling me to do this, and their beliefs didn't quite sort of mesh well with what I believe and what the consensus is within the Astronist community at the moment. And I've had some crazy stuff, crazy emails. So I suppose in that way, there is a sort of filter, if you will. There's a filter of sort of, I always keep a record of everyone that's messaged me, but there is a sort of filter of, does this work with what exists already within Astronism? So maybe there's a sort of precedent there of, if their ideas go against transcension, for example, that wouldn't be accepted because there's already that precedent. But certainly we are open to new revelation, new ideas, within a sort of limitation, if you will, because otherwise you can become anything. Sorry.
No worries. Joel, when you look up into the stars, do you feel that kind of divinity? Would you say? Because I think I do a little bit. I think like it. I think there is something to this in that the more infinitely you look, the more of God's presence is felt. And I feel like if we were to maybe escape Earth and the galaxy, then I feel like the God's presence would kind of increase that feeling, and then maybe like in the kind of extreme, maybe you'd if you kept exploring, then you'd finally meet him.
Well, I see it as a sublime experience, and I'm taking the word sublime from the Romantic poets, like Wordsworth and Keats and the like, that talked about a confrontation with a force of nature that is so vast and so complex and so difficult to comprehend for the human rationality that you have this feeling of awe and this feeling of beauty, but it's almost it's a terrifying beauty because it confronts you with your existential insignificance and lack of power in comparison to nature. But it's also in that there's a kind of sigh of relief in that you don't understand everything. You don't really know the forces that are at work in your life that control the physical space around you, but also control you and your emotions and your beliefs and your actions. There is a big sigh of existential relief in that. So I do agree that there is something to it. There's something, and I mean, I'm a spiritual person. As much as I hate the connotations of that term, I do believe that there's more going on to human life than let's say a scientific, more materialist thinker would say. There's something to it, and I guess what you've done is explored those feelings and those ideas and seen what's come to you in these visions and things. One thing I wanted to ask around these visions, and you did touch on it, but I wanted to know how you would answer the question straight up, is do you then see yourself as a prophet? Do you see yourself as a communicator with the divine? How do you navigate that question?
Yeah, I do in a way. Yeah, I do. I know it's a big thing to say, isn't it? But yeah, I do. But I think, like I said, in Astronism, we believe that any Astronist could be a prophet. That any Astronist could have this sort of similar experiences to me, and be able to communicate those and maybe change the direction of where Astronism is going. Obviously for me, I've only got a finite time on this planet. Eventually I will die. I'm still young, but I will die eventually. And there's going to be hopefully other people who will take Astronism on and take it in another direction. Do you know what I mean? And that's happened for all religions. If you look at the history of religions, there's always someone who started something, and then other people are the ones who've really developed it. They've taken it to new stages, because you can't do that all as one person. But yeah, I do think so. I think that, but I do think that I am a sort of prophet in that way, that I do have that communication with God. To be honest, over the last couple of years, I have felt more disconnected, and I'm always very honest with this. Always very, very honest with this. There's things that go on in people's lives that mean that at times they're not as spiritual, not as connected as they used to be. And I have to admit, yeah, in terms of my experiences, I haven't experienced some of these things I'm talking about for quite a few years now. Now, does that mean that they will come back? Maybe not. Maybe that was it for me. Yeah, maybe that period from, how old was I? I was sort of, when it started, I was 17 really, when I started to have those deeper experiences, to maybe, well, I'm 20, nearly 27. So I'd say up to maybe 24, 25. I was having those experiences semi-regularly, but over the last couple of years, I've not. And I do think to myself, is that it for me now? Is that what I've got to give to the world? And that's it, now I'm more in the stage, especially with this new book that I'm writing. And I think people will be able to tell that how it's written. It's much more philosophical than spiritual. It's much more sort of organized in a way than sort of that maybe natural, how it came about with the omnidoxy, which was much more chaotic and less organized and in a way much more layered writing. But yeah, maybe that's it for me now.
I,
You know, and I do
I,
admit that. I admit that, you know,
no,
it
I
might not come
appreciate,
back.
I appreciate the transparency
Mm,
and that's an interesting point. That as you've got older, it's sort of those experiences have dissipated. Were they
they have.
always, if you don't mind me asking, were these visions always when you were sober, or were any of them ever experienced
Yes.
under particular substances? Because obviously that's a recurring theme that comes up in our
Mm.
podcast that we talk about. And was it always in a meditative state, or was it always underneath the stars, or was it, you know, some point you could be in Tesco
Mm.
and suddenly a thought hits you? Like, what was the nature of it?
So first of all, no, they were always sober. Everyone always asks me that. I've always been very, very clear on that. And purposefully, I've never taken anything like that, even when I wasn't having as an experience, or even more recently, I've never taken anything like that. Just so then it doesn't um, sort of contradict what happened previously, if you know what I mean. I don't want that to sort of mix in with what I had experienced previously. So no, I've always been very clear about that.
As we begin kind of closing off our conversation, I'd
Yeah.
like to ask you, what is your personal end goal? You know, you talked about things passing on after your physical body dies, but where is all this going? What
Uh,
motivates you? What fuels you? What's an end goal? What's something you want to tick off by maybe the next 10 years or the end of your
uh,
lifetime?
yeah, this is a good question. First of all, I want to get this. I know I keep going about it. The second book done, because it's just been it's been a bit of a because I've had so many other things going on in my life. It's just been stagnated really. So I want to get that out there because it's so important. It adds so much more context to a lot of the things that I'm talking about. At a personal level, I just want to explore my faith to as much to as further degree as I can. I want to push myself to my limits of what I can write. I want to write as much as I possibly can on Astronism. So then I feel satisfied at the end where I can say, right, I've explored it to as much as I can do as my own individual person, and then I can sort of feel happy to let other people take it over. I think that's one of the other things is have other people sort of take it over, I suppose, because like I said, that is going to be the only way that it survives. There's so many examples in history of other people taking religions over from their founder and then the founder not liking what they did to it. So that might happen in the future. You never know. But because at the moment it still is in a way my baby in a way because I created it. It's something that I still have quite a bit of control over. Really, personally, I do have still quite a bit of control over what is said about astronism and what is put out there about astronism, what is produced about it. Whether and again, you have to accept that, you know, and that was part of making it public. Really, was accepting that other people will likely use this terminology, use my work, and do other things with it. I hope that they do good things with it. Of course, religion is often weaponized. So I hope definitely to get it on record that people do use it for good, for what it was meant to be used for, um, and not used for bad. I think that's something that I do fear, obviously, in today's world. But then also, in terms of astronism as a sort of an astronists as a community, I think just growing the community, introducing it to as many people as possible, I think is key. Getting it out there to as many people as possible, but then also maybe, I don't know, like establishing like a planetarium, for example. That would be really cool, which would be sort of an astronist place of worship, if you will, or something like that. That would be great to be able to do that. But again, I'm only one person, and I can't sort of do it all myself. It takes so many people to do that. And like I said, we're still at the start. So if you look back at the history of Christianity in the first 10 years, you know, they weren't doing so well within the first 10 years of their religion. There was people getting killed. They had nothing really. So in that way, us Astronists have a lot more because we have modern technology. We can communicate with each other. In terms of, you know, how fast it's spread, I think it spread very quickly, you know, because of the digital space. Again, if you look back at other religions, I mean, Islam spread fairly quickly. If you look at the history of Islam, fairly quickly. But the digital sphere has allowed Astronism as a new religion that has started off, you know, within the last 12 years. It's allowed it to spread very, very quickly. And, you know, in a way that would not have been possible, obviously, in previous centuries when other religions were founded. So, yeah, I'd say something along those lines of getting out to as many people as possible, on a community level, maybe establishing, you know, some buildings, you know, having a physical place, and then on a personal level, you know, writing as much as I can, continuing to explore astronomism as much as I can. That's one thing maybe to end on, is the idea that, you know, I'm still exploring astronomism. You know, tomorrow I could have another revelation. I could have, I hope so. I hope that I, you know, get more back into that, you know, in terms of having these grand experiences. It would be great to sort of have those experiences again. But even if I don't, you know, just at a philosophical level, reflecting on astronomism now is a lot of what I do. So reflecting on what I've written over the last 10 years, you know, exploring it more in depth, because when you're writing it for the first time, you're not exploring it, you know, you're not sort of looking at it critically, you're not analyzing it. So now a lot of the time when I'm looking at astronomism, I'm analyzing what I wrote. So I'm going back to the Omnidoxy, I'm looking at what I wrote, I'm thinking, wow, that's crazy what I've wrote there, but what did I mean, and what are the layers to that, and, you know, what significance does that have, you know? One of the things as well, sorry to ramble on, but one of the things that I am doing at the moment, which is a project with my own brother actually, he has agreed very nicely to actually handwrite the Omnidoxy. This is going to take years to do, but he's actually agreed to handwrite it for me. So that was something that I want to do, because at the moment it's on digital, so it was all written, you know, on a computer. But I would love to see it in a physical, you know, handwritten book, which would be so cool that we could then keep forever, as a sort of artifact, if you will. So that's a project that I'm doing at the moment that my brother is kindly helping me with, because he's got good handwriting. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of stuff that's going on. And just finally as well, again, sorry to ramble on, but also as well, we've got the Journal of Astronist Studies. You may or may not have seen this, but this is a academic journal that is published every August. So we've got a second issue coming out in August, where academics, writers, they contribute to the journal, so the Journal of Astronist Studies, and they write about anything to do with space religion, astronism if they want to, cosmism, whatever they want to talk about, as long as it's within the scope of the journal. And that is really helping the conversation move forward, because it's academics talking about astronism in an in-depth way, analysing it, analysing space religion. So please watch out for this journal. It's a great way. If you're into academic writing, it's not for everyone, but definitely if you're into that more in-depth discussion of space, religion, astro spirituality, astro philosophy, all this great stuff, it's all being discussed in there with some great people. And that's one thing I would say to any of your listeners as well. If you do want to have a go at writing an article, if there's something you want to say about anything to do with space religion, just get in touch, because I'm always looking for new articles. And so that's something that I'm very much promoting at the moment, because that's the way that you develop the conversation, isn't it? You develop it through that academic discourse, that academic discussion of astronism, to sort of gain it that recognition as a sort of legitimate topic. Like all other religions have their own academic journals, so the Journal of Astronist Studies is our way of doing that. So yeah, I wanted to get that out there, just to say. Sorry for rambling on. There's so much that's going on behind the scenes. It's just great to be able to talk about it for once, because I really don't get much time to sit and talk, and so thanks so much for having me.
No worries. Thanks for your time, and thanks everyone for listening.